Hello. So, chapters 15 and 16 for our third and final test. So, chapter 15 is on psychological disorders. And they give us just a very general definition of psychological disorders at the beginning of the chapter. It's just a syndrome marked by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior, right? Very, very broad general definition there for psychological disorders. And there are many different kinds of psychological disorders recognized nowadays, and we'll talk about some of those in this chapter, right? But mental disorders have always been an issue for human beings, right? We are a species that has a lot of diversity, right? So yeah, there are always going to be people that end up at the extremes that we have to decide whether or not the way they think, feel, and act should be considered a disorder if it goes to a far enough extreme. But it is kind of, it's not as objective as you might think in terms of diagnosing someone with a psychological disorder. And indeed, there are critics out there to this day, pretty severe ones that argue that there is, these are the really extreme ones, that would argue there is no such thing as a psychological disorder, right? They're just people that make us feel uncomfortable. They're just people that just will not, think, feel, and act as society thinks they should. And so they make us uncomfortable. And so we've decided to label them as having a psychological disorder and pump them full of drugs so they'll act more in line with what we think is appropriate. Right? That would be a very extreme position. I think you have to have some, you have to have psychological disorders be recognized. They are real, but we shouldn't be so judgmental about them, in my opinion. But anyway, human beings have always had some of us that act really weird and strange, right? So they found these holes drilled in the skulls there on page 611 of your book. You got a picture of this trepanation or trephination of actually drilled ancient skulls that have had holes drilled in them, and you can tell from the wound that it healed. They survived the procedure because you can tell it healed, and yet this person, for some reason, our ancient forefathers were drilling holes in the heads of people. Like, what? Maybe that was tattooing at the time. Maybe just for fun. Hey, well, come with me. I'm going to get me another hole drilled in my skull this weekend. Yeah, we'll have some beer. We'll do that. Yeah. Who knows? But our best guess, though, is that these people that had the holes drilled in their skull, Stone Age people had the holes drilled in their skull, they had some problem. They had some health issue and or what today we would think of as a psychological disorder. I mean, if someone's hearing voices from spirits that are not present, you might think that's a little suspicious, and you might want to drill a hole in their head to let the spirits out of their body as a type of treatment. Well, so we speculate that may have been what was going on. But for the vast history of humankind, though, the treatment of those who today we see as being psychologically disordered, for most of human history, those people have been treated terribly, right? They've been persecuted. They've been proclaimed witches, burned at the stake. People who are a little bit different, which, of course, we still have those people nowadays as one of my family. But, you let them, at times of stringency, people might lash out at someone that doesn't fit in, thinking that they've brought the devil in or whatever, the curse. So I'm afraid that's what's happened through most of history, probably, for the mentally disturbed or psychologically disordered. Now, finally, in the 1700s, right, we started thinking of these people a little bit differently. It evolved from thinking they're witches or in league with the devil or they're possessed. It evolved into just kind of a belief that there's nothing we can do about this, so let's just lock them up, right? So they built these large insane asylums across Europe and some of them here in America to just basically warehouse these people. And basically they were treated terrible, right? Absolutely terribly. I mean, they're chained to the wall, living in their own filth. You know, the treatments as they were, you know, bloodletting, like you'd cut them and bleed them, you know, and then there's some other really bizarre treatments treatments they gave these people. But basically, you're not fed well, you're being abused by the guards and so forth. And I do mention, like in Europe, a lot of the workers at these large insane asylums were not paid. All right, so they made money by giving tours of the facility to people. So people would go on tours of these facilities. That's how these people would make money. And yeah, there's no motivation to treat these people good. Who knows how many of these people were abused in terrible ways. And unfortunately also, the majority of people locked up in these large insane asylums were also women. Because it was easier to do that, to lock them away, right? The male in the family could just decide that something's wrong with them and just lock them up, you know, for not going along with what the man says or what the family wants them to do. Obviously, if they don't go along with that, there's something wrong with them. Even if there wasn't anything wrong with them, as soon as you put them in as an inmate in one of these large insane asylums, like I said, they're abused, not fed well, living in their own filth, they're going to end up with problems. All right? So most of these people just never came out of these institutions. And there wasn't any real treatment for these people. Finally, in France, along came a fellow named Philippe Pinel. And Pinel revolutionized, right, the treatment of those in these mental institutions, these large, insane asylums. You know, he started treating them humanely, feeding them well, you know, letting them get fresh air and exercise, and even what today we'd call like occupational therapy, teach them a skill that they could use when they left the institution. And amazingly, just treating these people more humanely and doing these simple things, many people got cured, right? Which, if you think, they probably were not psychologically disordered to begin with, right? So anyway, yeah, bad treatment. So Philippe Pinel helped, you know, change the treatment of these people to be more humane, and there were others in Europe that also did this, and here in America. But still, basically, there was no treatment for these people. Just treat them more humanely. Fresh air, exercise, feed them, you know. But there still was no direct treatment for the mentally ill. So, you know, not until the 20th century or the 1900s, really, and even there, not much, right, till maybe the 1940s, 1950s. But anyway, they do mention the medical model in here, right? The medical model approaches the treatment of those with psychological disorders from a strictly medical/biological point of view, all right? So for the medical model, like a psychiatrist, remember, a psychiatrist has an MD, a medical degree, so they're primarily are usually trained in medical or biological treatments for the psychologically disordered. You know, obviously the biggest treatment nowadays is drug therapy. So you prescribe drugs to get the balance of their neurotransmitters back where we want it, and so help them. But then they do also mention, obviously, the biopsychosocial model, which would incorporate the biological model or medical model, but also the psychological model, the habitual ways the person thinks, their personality, and also the social, how others influence their behavior and culture influences their behavior. So ideally, you want to look at all the possible factors that help bring about this psychological disorder and treat all of those simultaneously. That would be the ideal. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next chapter. But let me stop this video there.